Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about the Renaissance. The objective while watching the videos, I can annotate a piece of text through the content of the Renaissance. Remember, when annotating, we have 4 steps we have to follow. Step 1, circle any unknown words, look for context clues within the text that you're reading, or go ahead and look up the definition online or in a dictionary. Step 2, underline the main idea. Remember, there may be multiple things that you're underlining that help us to understand the whole of the main idea of the reading passage. Step 3 is to mark any questions in the text. Make sure that you put a question mark wherever it made you think of that question, as well as writing down the question that you thought of, and we'll discuss that in class when we talk about this reading passage. Step 4 is to paraphrase the reading. And remember, we have to make sure that we put it into our own words and we just don't take it word for word out of the passage. We're going to annotate this piece of text together. You got it earlier in the week in class. So go ahead and take that out and annotate it with me and follow along as I read. The Renaissance was a period of big change in European history. It was a time of intellectual excitement when art and literature blossomed and groundbreaking scientific advances were made. Over the course of about 300 years, the Renaissance spread from its home base in Italy, remember that's the country that looks like a boot, to Western and Northern Europe. The effect was like a sunrise making its way across the land. What I want you to do at this time is to pause the video, and you're going to complete steps 1 through 3 of your annotation. So you're going to circle any unknown words in this paragraph. You're going to underline any main ideas that you found, and you're going to mark any questions within this first paragraph that you found. Go ahead and do that now. Some unknown words that I found is intellectual. Intellectual means smart. And blossom. Blossomed is when something comes to life, like the flowers are starting to blossom now that it's finally spring and there's no more snow on the ground. Well, very little. The main idea that I found starts in the second sentence. It was a time of intellectual excitement when art and literature blossomed and groundbreaking scientific advances were made. Now it says it. What is it talking about? It was a time of intellectual excitement. It's referring it to the Renaissance. We're going to move on to the second paragraph, so please follow along as I read on to paragraph 2. To understand the changes the Renaissance produced, it helps to review the European society was like before it arrived. The time period before the Renaissance is usually called the Middle Ages, which stretched from the fall of the Roman Empire around 500 CE to about 350. Remember, this is the time period that we just studied. During the Middle Ages, the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope were the primary players in Europe. The custodians of culture, that is, the people who owned most of the books and made handwritten copies of the Bible, were priests who often lived a close existence inside the walls of monasteries. Schools were few. Illiteracy was widespread. Most of the population, more than 85%, was peasant farmers called serfs, who worked for a lord and his estate. Serfs were little more than slaves. Both serfs and their masters looked to the Catholic Church and the Bible to explain the world. The art and literature that existed focused on Jesus Christ and sin. Again, please take this time to pause the video and complete steps 1 through 3 in your annotation. Some unknown words that I circled myself was custodians. Custodians is the bearer of or in charge of. Another one that I circled is monasteries, and this was the name given to the churches or the schools, the buildings that the priests and the nuns lived in, the monks. And another one is illiteracy. Illiteracy means the inability or not being able to read or write. Now I'm going to circle some of the main ideas that I found in this reading passage. The first one is during the Middle Ages, the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope were the primary players in Europe. It's important to know how influential, how much impact the Roman Church really had on the lives during the people of the Middle Ages, because that's really going to be a completely different outlook than the people who lived during the Renaissance. Another one that I'm going to highlight is that schools were few and illiteracy was widespread. It lets us know that education was not very important during this time. Another main idea is that more than 85% of the population were peasants or farmers called serfs. This is important to know because if we remember feudalism, on the very bottom were peasants and serfs, and it made up so much of the population, and they were really practically slaves. The last one is that both serfs and their masters looked to the Catholic Church and the Bible to explain the world. They didn't try and justify anything. They weren't very scientific based, evidence based. They looked to the Bible, they looked to the teachings in the Bible and the teachings of the church to really guide their lives. Let's go ahead and move on to paragraph number 3. In the 1300s, important changes began to happen. Improved farming methods helped peasants become more self-sufficient. More and more serfs gained their freedom and no longer depended on lords. Some freed serfs migrated to towns where they took up trades. The number of merchants and bakers increased. Since these people needed to have an education to effectively carry on their work, literacy spread. Eventually, educated people began to question the teachings of the church. A movement called humanism developed, which praised the beauty and intelligence of the individual. Again, pause the video, complete steps 1 through 3, and then check back in and see what I highlighted and circled. The first unknown word that I circled was migrated. Migrated means move to. Another word I circled was self-sufficient. They relied on only themselves. They didn't have to worry about anyone else helping them out. The last one that I circled is humanism. Humanism focused more on the individual instead of the whole body of the church. Now going on to the main ideas of paragraph 3. The first main idea that I highlighted is that improved farming methods helped peasants become more self-sufficient. Because they became better farmers, they were able to fend for themselves and not have to rely on the lord or their master that they worked for. Another one that I highlighted is that eventually educated people began to question teachings of the church. Since peasants became more self-sufficient, they were able to get their own education. They were becoming educated, and they were starting to say, hey, is the church right? Is it telling us how we should live our lives? And they just started to doubt some of the teachings of the church. The last sentence that I highlighted as the main idea is a movement called humanism developed, which praised the beauty and intelligence of the individual. So it focused on each person that made up that whole body and said, hey, what does each person have to give? Now looking at this last paragraph, go ahead and follow along as I read aloud. As more people became educated, humanism worked its way into the arts, literature, the sciences, and medicine. The early Renaissance was especially vigorous in the city-states of Italy, places like Rome, Venice, Florence, and Milan. The invention of the printing press in the mid-1400s gave the Renaissance and humanism even more momentum. Initially, the Renaissance was an upper-middle-class movement, but thanks to merchandisation of printing, shopkeepers and street sweepers were able to afford books and articles that discussed the new ideas spreading across Europe. As a result, people started to look at themselves in a new way. Go ahead and pause the video for the fourth and final time. Circle any unknown words, highlight any main ideas, and mark any questions you have. Some unknown words that I circled was vigorous. Vigorous means strong. I also circled merchandization, which means working with machinery. I only highlighted one main idea in this passage, and it starts with initially the Renaissance was an upper middle class movement, but thanks to the merchandization of printing, shopkeepers and street sweepers were able to afford books and articles that discussed the new ideas spreading across Europe. What I want you to do at this time is please go ahead, flip your paper over, and paraphrase this reading passage. Make sure that you're taking those main ideas that we looked at, so the things that we highlighted in the text, and you're putting them into your own words, and that's how you're going to come to your paraphrasing. Adios, amigos.